and welcome to another episode of the IDRiM podcast. As mentioned in yesterday's episode, we're going to continue our series on the GADRI Summit for 2025. And today, to review day 2 of the GADRI Summit, we've got Professor Laurie Peake of the University of Colorado, Boulder.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for having us. So, Harris, you want to go for the first question?
Yeah, sure. Now, in related of the GADRI Summit and Laurie, you had 2 full days of sessions and discussions and networkings and rekindle your connection with GADRI after several years. What's one moment or message that really stood out for you in these 2 days of summit?
Oh, well, wonderful question, and thanks both for having me on here. It's been 2 amazing days and just packed full of information and possibility. I would say so many things stood out to me today, but I think one highlight that I want to emphasize is in the afternoon, right after lunch, they had report outs from all of the regional hubs. And so we got to hear from the North American Alliance of Disaster Research Institutes, and then we heard from Latin America and the Caribbean, South Asia, Africa, as well as the UK. And so it was just truly extraordinary to hear from these different leaders from around the world who are really bringing together networks, regional networks that are then feeding into the efforts of GADRI, but also expanding them in new and really fascinating ways. And so it was truly inspiring to hear. And of course, the different regional hubs are at different points in their formation. And so it was also just so inspiring to see, some of the longer standing regional alliances sort of standing up and wanting to support the newcomers and to share resources and information and strategies for bringing researchers and research institutes together. So that was really inspiring.
Yeah, and actually next week on the IDRiM podcast, we're actually going to introduce some of these regional alliances as well, because we feel that they are important to grasp. And I should say I'm actually on one of the committees of the regional alliances myself in the UK. So I know how important they can be to bring the institutions at a more regional, local level together. So today, there was discussion ranging from science and technology to community and resilience and policy. What connections did you notice between these areas?
Yes, I mean, it was so interesting to really fitting with the theme to see the convergence across regions, across disciplines of really this movement towards ensuring that we're continuing to support the most rigorous science, but also to ensure that that science is community informed, community led, that it's attendant to issues of justice and equity, and thinking carefully about existing inequities and how governance structures may or may not be positioned to address those inequities. And so that was definitely, I mean, I think, Ashley, you're really touching on a lot of threads that started to get woven together today. I won't say that we, came to any solutions necessarily, but there were some really great presentations that really centered on possibilities for how we might move forward given the urgency of the challenges that we are facing at multiple scales, from local all the way to the global.
So, based on your experience just now, that the convergence as taking as the main part of this year's summit, how it comes on in this summit? Where did it comes? Who brings it for this summit?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. And it was really amazing to see who was bringing a convergence mindset and approach to the work. And I have to say, it was cross-cutting. It was cross-cutting from across the countries represented there, the disciplines. We had structural engineers, sociologists, public administration folks. I mean, we had people across a range of disciplinary perspectives, theoretical perspectives, methodological perspectives, who were calling for convergence. And here, just to be really clear, because we also had some presentations that were really important on interdisciplinary, transdisciplinarity, but one of the really the hallmark of convergence is that it is problem focused, but it's also solutions based and interdisciplinary. So being interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary is necessary, but it's not sufficient. To move into that convergent space, it must be interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, but also have that problem focus and also an emphasis on solutions. How are we going to solve those problems that we've worked so long and so hard to characterize? And so it absolutely, it cut across the plenary sessions, the different concurrent sessions. And again, we were hearing that call to convergence, but a sort of participatory convergence, a convergence that isn't just from the top down with the scientists, the engineers, the so-called experts driving the problems and the solutions orientation. It was also really what I was calling a next wave of convergence that is also deeply driven by the community and relies on community engagement, because we know that no solution is going to be sustainable, just, or equitable if it is imposed from the top. It must also we must have that meeting in the middle. And I think we really heard that today with some exemplars from around the world of people who are again thinking deeply, not just about the problems, but also about the solutions, and how we bring teams of scientists, but also practitioners, local leaders from across the spectrum, and local people together to this cause of disaster risk reduction.
Yeah, and actually, just in the previous episode with Andrew, me and Andrew were talking about this very same, factor where we said that the convergence needed to go beyond just the topic; it needed to go down to the community. Because one of the things I said was that if we, like you said, impose it down. I come from a climate background, and I said it's all well and good, having all the science, but how does that fix the problem? You got the knowledge, but if the knowledge is not getting transferred and bringing the public with you, it's just not going to fix anything. And one of the things that's one of the things I like about GADRI is you're explaining it. I've been to the last 4 GADRI summits, and one of the things I love is it's not sociologists, it's not climatologists, or it's not hydrologists. It's everyone together, and woven all this together, because you get to see the other side of what you're trying to say. So if you're a human geographer, you get to see the physical side. If you're a physical geographer, you get to see the human side and how it all links together. So going on that, were there any surprising insights or shifts in perspectives you've experienced during today's talks, or even just during informal communication you've had during the coffee breaks or lunch hour?
Yes, thank you for asking that. I think, I always learn so much in these sorts of settings, and that's amazing to hear you've been at the last several summits, and I'm curious about what you've seen with the evolution of these GADRI summits. But to answer your question, it has been extraordinary to be in conversation with people from around the world who are really, really thinking carefully about how to bring data at multiple scales to bear on these problems that we're facing, but again, that are bringing data not just for the sake of data, not just for the sake of characterizing the problem, but really to help decision makers to make more evidence-informed decisions, to help local community members to answer questions that they have. And so I think just seeing that and hearing those sorts of cases from across the spectrum, that's been really enlightening and inspiring to hear common challenges, but also challenges that are really contextually specific. Also, it's been really, I mean, I think some of the things that have been really interesting is, listening to a representative from Canada as well as a representative from Japan, who are both trying to get traction in terms of um, pre-disaster recovery planning. And so to hear what that's like in these really different contexts, but also, again, to hear them share some common challenges with how hard it is to get people to think about disaster recovery planning before there has been a disaster, but also how vital that is. And so it's just, I think it's been that, like, how many of these challenges, again, we're seeing them common across the globe, but also how important it is to not lose sight of the context and the cultural specificity that's really necessary. And I think that's what's really, we've had the time and space to explore that during this meeting. And I think that's been really important.
From all those conversations that you mentioned, having connections with many people from outside your regional alliance, is there any particulars or some that sparks future collaborations, perhaps like with Japan or other countries?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. And already, I mean, several things. So, Rodrigo, who presented today on the burgeoning, the newly formed Latin American and Caribbean Alliance, I was fortunately sitting right next to him today, and I was part of the founding network that helped to stand up our North American Alliance for Disaster Research Institutes. And so I immediately turned to Rodrigo, and there were several other of us in the room from the North American Alliance, and we said, how can we help? What can we do? Already said, I hope that he can come to our natural hazards workshop in Colorado next summer, because our North American Alliance always meets in person there. And so, I mean, that is one just from today. Like I said, those regional alliance presentations were really inspiring. And so that, I know that's going to be one connection. We've already issued the invitation to have him come to Colorado. But I mean, so many other connections made, both honestly with researchers from within the United States who are right here that I met for the first time, students, postdocs. And so, these sort of national connections that are being made, but in terms of the global connections to a person, everyone that I've met here, we all share in common. We are all working to try to keep natural hazards from turning into disasters. And so what a cause to share in common. And so everybody I've met here has been really extraordinary. And it's just, so yeah, I think a lot of long-term connections made, and hope that we're going to keep raising up our voices collectively, because we're definitely stronger that way, which is what this alliance is all about.
Absolutely. And, it's one of the things I try to instill with some of my students right now is to conferences connect, it's to get them, because I think when you're a student, and I know this from, you were asking about my experience with GADRI, one of my first international conferences was, the GADRI Summit in 2017. So I was literally like a puppy dog, trying to, absorb all this. And it is, for a young researcher, it really is quite a challenge. And Harris, I know you were in 23, but I don't know if you did any of the other previous ones in your experience. For a young researcher, these ones are like almost overwhelming, because it's, you're all these, ones you've been reading about, and then you're meeting them for the first time. But I feel that we need to get more young researchers involved in this. And I know that we've talked with Hero on the podcast about 2 episodes ago now, that in 27 we want to put more of a renewed focus on making sure that young people are in the GADRI. How about yourself, Harris? What was your first one, actually? I'm curious, actually.
Well, my experience with the GADRI Summit is actually on 2019. So that's basically that's my first since I come to Kyoto in the end of 2017. So I didn't join the 27 editions, and that was huge, because like many different names from many different peoples I met for the first time, and then after COVID, that we have it online there, and then the 2023 that people start coming again in Kyoto and like having, oh, we met in the 2019, and like having those connections and try to rekindle of the conversation that we have several years ago, and like how much it changed after that, and it's just nice to see those people again, I
Oh,
guess.
I just want to say this is
Mm.
lovely to hear this. And today, when I was anticipating getting to talk to you both this evening, one of the notes that I wrote about a thread that I saw running through today was absolutely about this, about fostering the next generation. How do we support and uplift everything from engaging children in disaster risk reduction activities was one of the big with the South Asia presentation of their alliance. Really, we heard a lot about the amazing things they are doing throughout the South Asia region to engage children and youth. But then throughout many of the presentations, both yesterday and today, there was a lot of conversation about exactly this. How do we bring in, make sure that next generation leaders are right there at the fore, that also were sort of facilitating the mid-career researchers who are going to step into these leadership roles within both the academic research institutes that are largely represented within GADRI, but also in other spots that are of critical importance, such as within the United Nations and so forth. So it has really been on the agenda. And I'm sort of wondering tomorrow when we talk about getting ready for the next summit in 2027, I was thinking about maybe proposing that as a possible theme of thinking about that sort of next generation, because I think you're both right that is absolutely critical, because there is only going to be more and more demand in this field. And so how do we support, uplift, bring in that diverse next generation and make sure they are prepared to lead moving forward, because you already are leading in these extraordinary ways. So it's making sure you're right there at the center of the table.
Regarding that, beyond the summit, I mean, like, I know it's like become a sessions and it's being talked in the summits. What kind of, if you have any idea, support that GADRI will offer to the young researchers as a means of the preparing for lead in the future? Is there any specific program that is being prepared, or it's just an idea or just discussions?
That is a good question, and I think I will definitely raise it tomorrow during our convening, because I'm actually not sure at the GADRI level what is offered, but I can speak to within the North American Alliance. We absolutely identified this, talked about this. There's been a lot of conversation in the United States, in particular, about the so-called graying of the field. This was Bill Anderson was one of our long-standing leaders within the hazards and disaster field, and he was always very worried about this, the graying of the field, the aging out of the leaders, and how we would make sure and continue to cultivate, expand, and nurture within the field. And so a couple of the things we've done within the North American Alliance are we have a Justice, Equity, and Future Leadership Committee, and that committee is specifically dedicated to these sorts of questions that we're talking about today. How do we bring justice and equity to the fore, but also how do we continue to cultivate that next generation leadership? And growing out of that, the North American Alliance a couple of years ago under Grace Yann's very able leadership, she and the board established a Rising Star, a GADRI Rising Star Award that has been given out to early career postdoctoral as well as graduate student scholars to really represent that next generation, and to recognize their contributions to the field and make sure their contributions are being uplifted and shared. And so I think, I hope, maybe, I'm not sure if it's going to be tomorrow, if we'll have time to share some of these lessons more concretely about what's happening at the regional level that might feed up into GADRI. But it definitely, again, I can't tell you how many presenters today referred to this need to cultivate, support, nurture, train, mentor, provide resources, all the things that we know are necessary to continue this field, and not just to help it to survive, but really to thrive. So I hope this is going to continue at the fore of the agenda, because without the workforce, we can't do the work.
Yeah, and in the UK, it's in our constitution that we have 3 early career researchers on the steering committee who represent the voice of the young researchers. And we have in recent years developed our own almost like alliance on its own, where we have our subcommittees that then feed up to the main 3 representatives over into the main committee to basically get, the voices, so we know what is needed, what are the issues, and then if there's any concerns, we can raise it back to the main committee. Then, because we recognize that in the UK in particular, it's getting harder for the early career researchers, because I'm going to be very careful I say, but we're under a major financial squeeze from the top. So what we're finding is early career researchers' opportunities are starting to be pushed quite far down the list. So we're having to be a bit more innovative on how we look after the next generation, because it's always the case. ECR funding will be the first to be cut before anything else gets cut. So we're trying to think of ways that doesn't cost very much or anything, but still gives them experience. And actually coming on to that, we've talked about, youth leadership already, and we've talked a little bit about community engagement, but have issues such as gender also been represented so far during this conference?
Yes, that is a great question. And yes, several of the presentations have, particularly from women who are leading various initiatives, have really brought this up and spoken about the importance for recognizing women. Yesterday, one of our presentations, actually from Kit Miyamoto, he was speaking about how an engineering project in Afghanistan that did not account for gender, and what ended up happening, because the project that was ultimately built did not have proper segregated spaces that would allow for normative gender separation. And so what was happening was women were literally living in tents up in the hillside, while men were living in this engineered structure. And so he was making this point that when we just engineer a building without consideration for the social, cultural, religious context, that this is the outcome. And so again, it was even when people weren't explicitly using that language of convergence, it has continued to come through as people have shared stories along those lines, shared data that have really emphasized, again, that if we don't bring careful a gendered lens, if we don't have a lens that takes account of historical as well as contemporary racial and ethnic inequalities and injustices, then we're missing part of the picture. We may be missing the picture altogether. And so, yes, absolutely, there have been some really good presentations that have brought gender to the fore, age to the fore, race and ethnicity, and of course, really thinking about income status and how that shapes capacity, creativity in the face of crisis, and so forth. So yeah, thank you for asking about that. And I think it's critical that we not lose sight of exactly how important it is to look at when we talk about the community, to ensure that we're actually talking about the community in all of its diversity and complexity.
So, from all those topics or ideas that is being discussed in the summit, how that kind of works being discussed there, translating into real world impact. Is there any implementation plan that will be used by regional alliance, or giving recommendations, something like that?
Thank you. Both these are just wonderful questions. And I think to that question specifically, what really got pressed today, which I think was important. So this morning opened up with 4 sort of recaps, which was a great idea of breakout sessions from yesterday, because obviously none of us are magic and could be in all 4 sessions at once. So we had these sort of 10-minute recaps of what we learned about governance or marginalization in the different sessions, and the recaps were fantastic. But then at the end of the recaps, Gretchen was one of the moderators, and she said, the one thing I did not hear in any of those recaps was what is next after 2030 when we're at the end of the current Sendai, and what is GADRI to do? And I think that was so important that she called that into the room, because otherwise the recaps were recaps. What did we hear? What were the presentations on? What were some of the common threads? And so it was great from a scientific as well as a practice perspective to hear those recaps of the presentations from yesterday. But I think by Gretchen really calling that question this morning, I think what it did was it ignited something in the room to remind us that we're here really as this global alliance. And if we don't figure out and have a plan for what is it that we're wanting to advocate for, and who are we trying to advocate on behalf of, what causes are we thinking about, scientific and otherwise, that this moment is going to be missed. And so I think it was really important that she called that into the room. And then throughout the day, people would sort of, make a comment, and then they'd say, we hope that's a cause that GADRI is going to pick up after 2030 or in the lead up to 2030. And so, so anyway, I think it's a really important question you're answering. And I think that Gretchen pushed the right button this morning, because it did focus the conversation in a different sort of way. Because as we know, when there is a void, people or organizations, there's always somebody that's ready to step into that void and to start to fill it. And so I think GADRI is now contemplating that. How do we want to mobilize, and how do we want to think about moving this cause of disaster risk reduction forward as an alliance?
And so looking forward to tomorrow, the last day, what are you looking most forward to?
Oh my gosh. It's definitely going to be another full day, an exciting day. I think just apropos of this conversation that we've had, I'm really looking forward to hearing whether there is any convergence tomorrow around what the 2027 theme should be for the GADRI Summit. And I'm also really excited to hear what ideas there are for keeping this momentum alive, because we all know, there is just such a magic in coming together. And I think COVID made that so present when we weren't able to join physically together in rooms, and to have that spark that occurs when people are together and sharing ideas and sharing knowledge and sharing a vision for the future. And so I'm excited to hear about sort of practical strategies for keeping this momentum from this meeting alive, but also really, what is the vision? What are we going to gather around, and what are we going to fight for, in light of the fact that we're living in a world where there is so much that needs to be done, and what is our piece of that puzzle where we're going to try to make a difference?
So I guess that's it for the second day's wrap. Thank you very much, Lori Pick, for coming with us and to give a recap for the second days. And hopefully you have fullest and enjoyable the third days and the last and finally meeting with everyone again, and say goodbye to them again.
We will. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to get to have the opportunity to speak to this. And you two are just, what a service you are doing to our global disaster risk reduction community. So thank you both. Thank you for your preparation, your willingness to get up very early your time and to be with me late my time. And I wish you were here with us in Colorado, but we hope that we'll see you at the next summit in Japan.
Yeah. So that's it, guys, about the second days of the summits. Stay tuned for the last days of the summits, and see you again.